Hey guys, and welcome to this session on how to set up a Python development environment the proper way. This is my personal preference in how I do it, and we use a range of libraries. We're going to be using Poetry, Ruff, Coverage, and Tox. Now suppose we have a project that looks like this. You've got your code in here, got some main.py, you've imported some libraries, maybe we've got some tests. Yeah, there they are, test main. So some pretty simple boilerplate code. We've got a ruff.toml file, so imagine we're using Ruff in the terminal to go ahead and lint all this. Maybe that's what you're up against at the moment. And for starting off, that's okay. It's certainly what I did for a number of years. However, there are some really interesting tools we can use to make managing all of the dependencies, all of the linting, all of the tests, it can make it a whole lot easier. So I want to go through how to set this up from scratch today. So just to get some basics out of the way, what I mean by development environment is a couple of things really. One, it's a nice way to manage your dependencies for the actual project you're doing, so like all of this. We want a nice way to run linting, formatting, tests, a nice way to build the project, and we want a nice way to develop a special environment for each of these three things we're going to be doing. We're going to need Ruff for this, but we're going to need things like Coverage and PyTest for this. So it's a bit different in terms of what we need for each task. So we'll start off right from the beginning and we'll get going. So you can see I've got a VM here, my virtual environment. I need to go ahead and activate this first. And I'm going to go ahead and just install the prerequisites, which are Poetry and Tox. Okay, I already have these installed, but yours will look different to this here. So let's clear that screen. And the first thing we need to do is set Poetry up. Poetry is like our main dependency manager for effectively everything, for the project, for the tests, for the linting, etc. And just make sure you're in the location where you've got your main project. So my project's just called, well, my project, not very exciting. I've got my tests in here, my Ruff toml, got my session names, and I've got a blank README file, which is not very useful, but yeah, it needs to be there for the time being. But of course, for a real project, you of course put your documentation in here. And Poetry makes it quite nice and easy. You simply run Poetry init. So short for Poetry initialized. I'm going to make sure I get this correct. So because I've called it my project, I'm going to make sure I do the same just to make it consistent. Version, doesn't matter. Some text can go here. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, 311. And it's going to ask you here if you want to define your dependencies interactively. I put in no because I want to put them in myself later on. I'll also do the same for this one. And then it's going to give you a little preview of your toml file. We can say, yes, we want this. And it should make a pyproject.toml file. There we go, you can see it, my project. The reason I put the README in, because it does this automatically for you here, so it defines that's your README. And we can see at the moment, our only dependency is, well, it's Python. But if we go to my project and look at main, we can see our project actually uses NumPy and requests. So we're going to go ahead and need to figure that out. So we will do poetry add requests. Should take a second. You'll see it generate a lock file. That's like a snapshot of what's currently installed via Poetry. That will happen whenever you run like Poetry install or something like that. So if I go back here, we can also see requests. That's good. Now let's go ahead and add NumPy, or NumPy, however you want to call it. And that'll do the same thing. Because I've just done Poetry add NumPy, it's going to go to the latest version, but you can pin this if you so want. If you changed it here, you could do like Poetry install no root or Poetry update, whatever, and it'll update it. But yeah, I'm cool with the latest versions. That should be all good. So let's close that for a second and head back to our session aims. Now, if I come down here, how this is all going to work is, and I think how I want to make the video make the most sense is start from the commands we're going to be typing in here. So, for example, say you want to run a linting or run a build or run some tests. We always do that via the terminal. So I want to start off with how do we make these commands actually do something and then go into kind of building it from the ground up. So we're going to be using Tox. Tox is a nice tool to manage environments. So if I start here, I'm going to define my Tox ini file. And the first thing we're going to do is set up a pathway to go from Tox to Poetry to install all the dependencies and to make some stuff happen. So in this case, say you want to make linting happen, we'll run the command tox e lint. This will go to Poetry and make it install some dependencies. Let's go back here. And then what Tox will do, it'll say, okay, now you've gone to Poetry and done this, we can then run some commands in Ruff. So Tox invokes Poetry, Poetry goes ahead and says, okay, let's install Ruff, and then now Ruff is installed, we can run the commands, and at the end that environment is considered done with. So let's begin from here. So if I do touch tox.ini, and we should see this appear there as a blank file. I'm going to quickly paste in a simple configuration, and here is my simple configuration. Now in this env list here, this is where we define the sort of different jobs you want to do, and I have a lint job here. You can see that this name, this my project, matches the name of my actual file here. That's really important, otherwise Tox is going to be very unhappy with you. Now the command we're going to run is tox-e-lint, but if I run it currently, let's see what it does. Okay, there we go, lint okay. So the reason that's happened is because we've defined like a job for it to do, but that job doesn't have any specific steps. So yeah, it's got nothing to fail against. So what we need to do is define some actual commands that linting actually needs to do. And here is a template for what it's going to be looking like. So we have a job defined. So in my test environment, we have lint. You want to make sure you have this to allow Poetry to work properly. We have two sections. We have a commands pre and a commands. So what we do in the commands pre, we normally say to Poetry, right, go ahead and install this group of dependencies. And then the commands go ahead and do those actual commands, given that we now have the correct stuff installed. So what we do for this is where it gets probably a little tricky for the first bit, but when we come to do the building and the test, it does get a little bit easier. So we do the following. We say Poetry install -- no root. No root means install the dependencies, not the project. Then we say -- with, spelled correctly, hopefully, with lint. Now, if we did this now, Poetry doesn't know what this is. Poetry doesn't know what lint means. So what we do is go back to our PyProject.toml file and see how we have our main Poetry dependencies. We want to define a separate set of dependencies that are used just for linting. I'm going to quickly paste these in, and there we are. So we say tool.poetry.group lint. Make this optional, which is okay. And then we do group.lint.dependencies Ruff. I'm just using the latest version. I think it is. It's the latest version of Ruff here. So let me show you how these two link. When we do tox-e-lint, so like this is basically saying to Poetry, okay, it's time to get to work and do something. So this is saying to Poetry, go and install the dependencies, not the package, with the group known as lint. Now, PyProject has a group called lint, and it says, this is what you're going to be installing. And then once it's done, these are our pre-commands, we can then actually do some stuff with Ruff then. So what we do is we do Ruff check, and the way to make this work properly is if you do base, like this name here, it actually takes the name from this, which is quite useful. And then we'll also do Ruff check my tests as well. So let's fire this off. We'll do tox-e-lint. See if this works first time. Now we have this message, which is actually really common. Basically what it's saying is, so if I go to my PyProject.toml, we've defined dependencies in here, and this is like a snapshot of the most recently installed dependencies. This is Poetry telling me that these two things are out of sync. So what you do to correct this is really simple. You just run that command there. You do Poetry lock, no update, spell it correctly, and that's going to resync our lock file and our PyProject.toml file. There we go, it's done. Let's run tox-e-lint again. And we should see it do some stuff. There we go. So we see it do its commands pre, Poetry install no root with lint. So that has done this, my pre-command. And then you can see it's gone and done Ruff check my project. That's this here. And for some reason it's failed the linting, which I'm not too worried about for now. It looks like it's failed on missing doc strings, which is okay. If I look at the D104, let's have a look at that. That'll be because, I scroll down here, that'll be this guy, PyDocStyle. PyDocStyle wants you to have doc strings at the top of every file. So if I head into here, it's kind of annoyed that there's no something here, basically. So if I did this, for example, maybe I run this again. Yes, there's now only two. But yeah, that's why that one failed there, which is good. We like that to happen. So suppose that you're running this as a proper package. You can then just simply do tox-e-lint every time you make some new changes. We can then set up the environment with Poetry. We can then tell Ruff to go and check our code. And after that, it's all done. It's all cleaned up. And then you're good to move on. we're not having to manually activate an environment just for linting. It also means we haven't got one big virtual environment with like all of your packages dependencies, all of PyTest, all of Ruff. Tox is basically handling this specific job for us, which is quite nice. One of the things I often have as well is a step to try and build the project. So it's as simple as literally taking this. This is where it gets a bit easier. I think the first one's a bit tricky because you've got to try and link Tox and Poetry together. Going to be build. And this time we're going to be changing these to something that's actually relevant. You want Poetry to try and build the package. So in this case, let's remove our commands. We're going to say this time, do it with build. So that means we have to go back to our PyProject TOML in a second and add a build group with its dependencies in. And the commands this time, we're going to be asking Poetry to try and build this package. So we can do Poetry build, and we can do as well, this is where I'm going to be adding this to Poetry in a second. We can do twine check dist like this here. This is where the actual distribution is going to sit. So that means we need to go to PyProject and add this as a separate group with its own dependencies. So why don't we go and do this? Put this down here somewhat. Make this into build and make this into build. We can remove Ruff from this, and we're going to be using twine here. So just to recap, if we did tox e build, it's going to say to Poetry, right, go ahead and install the build group, which is this here. Once it's then done, it's then going to say Poetry build, so that'll create a distribution of the build package, and then twine is then going to come along and check it for us. What I might do just to keep this simple is run this again, because I've updated my Poetry, and that should be good. Now I can run tox e build. We should see, with some luck, just thinking about it, there we go, there's my distribution here. So it's not liked it, which is fine, not too fussed about that for the time being. Distribution, and there we go. So it's made the wheels for the project and the tar.gz file as well. Okay, so with regards to this here, I just did a bit of quick looking on Stack Overflow. It turns out twine actually can need this as well for this version. Anyway, because this video isn't specifically about twine, I'll just import the correct dependency, and let's go ahead and try that again. So we can do Poetry lock. So this should now satisfy what twine was doing. Just nice to have the job fully run through. And then we'll try tox e build. Should do the same thing. There we go, that's all good. Okay, so see how it's made it with 010? That's because in my PyProject, where have I done it? Yeah, there we go. I have to find the version here, which is all good to go. So we can clear this. And you probably noticed there's a bit of a pattern kind of occurring now. So we first define the thing we want to do inside of here. We will then make sure that this particular group exists inside the PyProject. If it does, cool. You can then try and update by using Poetry lock no update, which is this one. You can then just run tox and then run the build stuff all the way through. What you can do as well, if I just do tox like this, it will go ahead and do all of them. So we now have, we've not got this yet, which is okay, but we do have build, we do have lint. So see what that did? That did, let's have a look. I did it quite quick, didn't it? There we go. So it did the build first, and it did this here. So suppose you were developing like a big piece of software. Envision that in a few minutes our test will be done. You could just run that one command. It'll run all of your tests. It'll try and build the project. It'll do all of your linting in like one command. So once this is all set up, yeah, it's a bit of a pain in the arse to get it all done right at the beginning. But once it's done, I think it pays dividends down the line. We're not running separate commands for doing things like your linting and your building. Define it once inside tox. Let tox handle the environments with its commands pre-section. You can just define, here's what to do, go ahead and do it, which is quite nice. Now, before we get onto our tests, let me show you something cool I like to kind of do as well. If I do test env lint, copy it down here, change this to format, and now we can use Ruff, but just in a different way. So we can do the same install with lint, but rather than doing Ruff check, do Ruff format tests. Let's clear this, and let's make this look a bit, I don't know, do something like this here. Let's mess it up a little bit. And now, because we have a tox job called testenv format, let's see if this does it live. If I do tox ev build, change that to format, we should see it, install Ruff, get it set up in the environment, and then, there we go. Ruff can come along and format your code for you. So that's another nice kind of use case for Tox there. I wouldn't add it to here purely because it'll do like the format and the build, the lint. I mean, you could, nothing wrong with it, but I would keep this as like run the tests, run the build, run the lint, and I'd keep this here just as a nice way for me to say Tox E format. Format the code after maybe a large refactoring or something, and then we're good to go. Now to get our tests working, let's go ahead and see how we can do the same thing with Tox and PyProject to make these tests fire off here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to quickly make one of the tests fail here. So this guy data here should be a list. We're going to make it fail on purpose. So we go into Tox. I'm going to paste in this right at the top here and just quickly cover it. So it's basically the same as the other three we've done, except of course this time it's going to do a different group. We'll go do that group in just a second. And the commands are a bit different as well, of course. So the commands are using coverage, and then coverage invokes PyTest. What this does, coverage is effectively acting like a wrapper around PyTest. So PyTest runs the actual tests, except what this then does, it then puts the results of that test in a coverage file. And this guy here, this coverage report data file coverage, uses the file generated by the tests to make a nice little report appear in the terminal. Basically, it's a way to figure out how much of your code is covered by the test, which is quite useful. So let's go to our PyProject. I will add this group and make sure that our dependencies are good to go. I'm going to put this right at the bottom here. There it is. So it's just got PyTest, it's got coverage with some extras here. This is in case you wanted to do an XML file as part of your output. I don't need to in this case specifically, but it's quite nice to have. We've got PyTest mock as well in case you want to do any fancy mocking. So with that done, I want to make sure I've got this all set up. Let's go and run this command again. Purely out of habit, this one. But that should be good. And now what we can do, if we do tox e py311, so running our test one. So we'll run this, and this should now go ahead and do our tests. There we go. So there's our failed test, and you should be able to see where it's done it. Yeah, it's pointed to the right one. So I'll make this a list. So there's our tests failing. Now let's make them pass, and we should see the coverage output now. Hopefully it works. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. So we can see from main.py, we have covered 100% of our code, which is good. So this bottom bit here, this little highlighting bit, that's purely from this step. So if you just did, back to Tox, suppose you removed this for a second, ran this again, it would run the tests and not give you the coverage report. So that's fine. Maybe you could do this, run it again. There we go. Run the tests, it's also put this in as well. Suppose you did want to do an XML as well, do that no problem. In fact, let's do this with it all. So if you just run Tox, check this out. It's going to run our tests first. There we go, it's main.xml. Whilst that's happening, there it is, got all that. So you can show this in a web browser if you wanted to. So let's go right to the top. So just by doing Tox, we have our tests ran, all good to go and passed. We've done our build. That's built the project, it's done its tar.gz, it's done the wheels, it's then tested them, it's then done rough check my project. It'd be a shame to make it fail, wouldn't it? Let's go ahead and do the rest of them. So where's it failed? It's done it on init. Let's do this here, let's just call this my code. Yeah, not the best, but that's fine. And it's missing in my project main.py, missing docstring in public function line 7. Yeah, I'm not going to take this seriously, just to make the tests run, or the linting run, I should say. So now we should see success throughout the board. There's the tests, there's the building, and it's failed the lint. Oh goodness, look at that. That's because it wants all the tests done as well. Let's make it not do the tests just for a second. So let's do, where is it? Rough check test. So if we remove that just for a second, suppose you're in a lazy mood, we could ask Tox not to check the tests for the linting step. So there's the tests, there's the building, there's the linting. There you go. You get this nice kind of output at the end, so you can see tests, build, lint, all done, all good to go. So make sure you check out the link in the bottom of the video. I've put this in a nice GitHub page. So if you want to clone it, download it, whatever, this will be a nice basis to start off with. It's got all of your Tox stuff set up and good to go. I'll make sure to put that back in as well. It's got the PyProject here, all good to go as well. So this will be a nice, simple way to start off a project in a nice professional development environment. Cheers for watching, guys, and I'll see you all in the next video.